Thank you so much for coming along to the Flipped 3.0 Global Summit. Now, during the presentations today, we're going to have some presentations. Can I ask if you have questions, if you can leave them to the end, and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end. Also, later on this afternoon, especially if you've traveled far to come here today, we'll be offering a tour of MEF University from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. So if you want to come on the tour, please can you meet us in the lobby, and we'll take groups on a tour from the lobby. And then from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock, we're going to have a special question and answer session with myself, with John, with Errol in the university. So I'd like to start by inviting John Bergman to the stage to give our opening presentation. Thank you, John.
Today, we are literally going to change the world. I mean that. I mean that literally. Today, we're going to change the world. Here's a stunning fact to ponder. Do you know that in virtually every country in the world, from the US to China, and from Spain to Dubai, and from Iceland to Istanbul, classrooms have two remarkable things in common. Number one, they look a lot like each other. And number two, they look about the same as they did 100 years ago. Here's what a classroom looked like 100 years ago. Here's what a classroom looks like today. All right, we're having issues. And even more remarkable, if you Google the word classroom, followed by any random list of countries, this is what you'll find. This is what a classroom looks like in the United States, and in Taiwan, Japan, Uganda, Afghanistan, Tibet, the Middle East, China, India, the Himalayan mountains, Vietnam, Peru, in rich countries, in developing countries, in the military, and in prison. But you didn't come here because you thought education was all wonderful. You came here because you know that active learning is better than passive learning. Because what we've been doing is we've been lining up students like widgets in a factory and attempting to pour knowledge into their heads. So why did you come? You came because you know that active learning is better than passive learning. That's why you came here, because you know this. You know that an active learning classroom, a flipped classroom, well, it looks like this in Iceland, and it looks like this in Taiwan, and in Morocco, and in Singapore, and Iran, at Harvard Medical School, in New Zealand, Hong Kong, Nigeria, Spain, Australia, China, Argentina, the USA, and right here where we're standing at MEF University, the first fully flipped university in the world. So why? Why are we here today? Well, we're here to do what? To change the world. We are literally going to change the world today. Because what you know is that active learning is always better than passive learning. But we know that most of educational institutions, passive learning. There's still people, who think that flipped learning is a fad. It's just a fad. Well, you tell that to the 4 students I talked to yesterday here at MEF. I sat down and I said, so why did you come to MEF University, the first flipped university in the world? The first girl said, my friend said it was a good school, and I didn't know anything about flipped learning. I said, so now, What do you think? She says, I'm sold. The next student said, I came here because it was flipped, because I knew it was going to make a difference in my life. Let's listen to our students. Some people think that they're still asking the question, does flipped learning work? But you probably know, right? You know there's been over 500 peer-reviewed articles about flipped learning. And it's telling us that flipped learning works. I write an article for our organizational's magazine, the Flipped Learning Review. And in there, I cite the top 10 research articles every month. In August, now they're all peer-reviewed. In August, you know how many research articles were written about flipped learning? 95 in 1 month. And they're painting a very interesting picture if you look at the research. So if people are still asking, does it work? It works. So the reason, though, we want to change the world, but the reason that today is so important is that we want to ask the question, how do we make flipped learning more effective? Because there's been a problem in the flipped learning world since its inception. And that problem is that we've been doing flipped learning in boxes or silos. When we first started doing flipped learning in 2007 at my high school in the United States, we didn't call it flipped learning. We called it reverse learning. And we didn't call the videos videos, we called them podcasts. And some of the teachers at our school, they didn't like the idea. They didn't like the change. And they said, we'll never do that. And about 3 years into us doing flipped learning, by that time it had acquired the name flipped learning, a math teacher walks down the hallway. Her room was 8 doors down. And she came and said, John and Aaron, I just read this really cool article about something called flipped learning. I think it's a great idea. What do you think about it? Like, yeah, I think it's a good idea. She was living in a box, and we were literally 8 doors away. We were recently in Brazil. And Brazil, they were struggling with some of the aspects of flipped learning. And little did they know, a 45-minute plane ride into northern Argentina, they would have found people who could have answered the very questions they were struggling with. Because flipped learning has been happening in boxes, in silos, all over the world. But today that changes. Because we're going to change the world. In 2017, 30 people got together and said, we've got to stop this problem of flipped learning in boxes. That led to the foundation of the Academy of Active Learning, Arts, and Sciences. And the Academy, who is sponsoring this event today, said, we've got to answer that question. That led us to call out to many of the people who are in the live stream, many people who are here today, that led us to 100 people in 49 countries from around the world who said, we've got to figure out what are the best elements and practices of flipped learning. The leadership group was headed up by Dr. Eric Mazur at Harvard University. You're going to hear from each of these people in a few minutes. Myself, Dr. Caroline Fell-Curbin, who's right here, right? Dr. Raul Santiago from University de La Rioja in Spain. Robin Brinks-Lockwood, Stanford University, and Guojin Huang from National Taipei University of Science and Technology. An amazing group of people. We went through a process, a long process that took us over a year. The process was extensive. You can see the process timetable, submissions, peer review, more peer review, voting. It was a huge process that we went through to come up with what are the best practices. We then opened it up to the rest of the world. We said, all right, rest of the flipped learning world, what do you think? We used a tool called Thought Exchange, which is this really cool tool that allows you to analyze data. We'd analyze the data with cool graphs and stuff. Smarter people than I, who understand big data and stuff. And we drilled down even more deeply. And we realized that flipped learning itself is changing the way we do education. But we realized that as we started these this process, there were lots and lots and lots of different elements. It almost seemed overwhelming. And then the team got together and said, we need to think of a way where we can simplify the best practices of flipped learning, the global flipped learning practices, right, from the US to China to Spain to Turkey to everywhere in the world. And we came up with, well, this, that's going to change the world. These, my friends, are the global elements of flipped learning. You might notice it looks like elements, like periodic table. You see, my background as a chemist kind of came into role, but the colors really matter. This makes a difference. It's an easy to understand visual representation of what flipped learning is. If you want to know where to find the table, go to flglobal.org/elements. The link will be on the additional slide, so no need to rush. Turns out there were 187 different best practices, which may feel overwhelming, but that's why we simplified it into the table that you see there. Let's dive into the table a little bit. If you go to the website, it's still on the screen there, you can click on each of the links, and then they will open up, and it'll tell you what the standards are and some different resources that you can use to learn more about those specific standards. So again, flglobal.org/elements. We'll get you there, right? But they're arranged. They're also written out in a long format, so you can read them one at a time. And to look at just one of them, they're just the 2 or 3 words that explain what they are, and then there's a symbol, and then there's the C. The C stands for something. So let's talk about the symbology at the bottom. So if you look at the first column, the first family, or if you remember high school chemistry or university chemistry, there's families of elements. The first family has to do with communication and culture. It's so important that we build the right culture in our institution so that we can really make flipped learning work. The second column has to do with professional development. And this is so important. So many people, this really comes back to the living in boxes, having global and local communities. The third family is the meat. The meat of flipped learning has to do with what you do in the individual space. This is the pre-class work of flipped learning. And then if we go down, we move to the individual, or the group space. That's what you do during the class. We continue to go across the table. We then have some that are just focused on K-12. By the way, there are some focused on higher education, but they're interspersed. You'll notice if you look carefully, they have a star or an asterisk next to them. And then we have the evidence and research. By the way, this is one of the things I think that is most lacking in some areas, is there's still people who should be conducting research on flipped learning who aren't. Flipped learning is not about the technology. Who was I just talking to? There's somebody right there. Where are you at? I lost somebody here I was just talking to about reason flipped learning works is it doesn't start with the technology, but there is a technological component. So there is some best practices relating to technology. Student feedback, that's one of the most important things, right? You want to make sure that you're getting feedback from your students so that you can improve and iterate and make your flipped learning program better. And then understanding flipped learning, this is through the definition. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And then going down, 2 great features at the bottom is that how do you plan for flipped learning? It changes how a teacher plans. It's not the same way to plan for a regular lesson. And then lastly, assessment. It really is an amazing thing. Does it change how we think about assessment in flipped learning? Ladies and gentlemen, today marks a day where the world is going to change. Because now we have a roadmap. We now know what the best practices of flipped learning are. It's not a mystery anymore. And we don't have to live in our boxes. We can change the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. Now I would like to invite to the stage Errol St. Clair Smith. Errol's going to be talking about going global or falling behind. Over to you,
Errol. Good morning to everyone. Thank you. It's a very big honor to be here at MEF. the very first fully flipped university in the world. We've been working with Dr. Sain and Dr. Kurban for some time, and we've heard a lot about what you've been doing here, and we're really excited to be able to come and to see it firsthand. So thank you very much, and of course to be able to meet all of you. I want to begin by showing you this. I call it the piece. And I call it the piece because in my wallet, I carry this with me everywhere I go. And I do that to remind me that on those days when my ego might get to me and I start thinking that what I'm doing is so important, or that what's inside of my head is so important, or that the work that I've done is so important, this reminds me that if I could take all of what's in my head, all of the work that I've done, and put it in my hand, it would be a very, very small piece of a very big picture. So it keeps me in perspective. It also reminds me that in order to do really meaningful work, that in order to be really effective, in order to be as good as I can possibly be, I have to find out how my little piece fits into the big picture. 2 years ago, when I came to work with John, I had been following his work for about 3 or 4 years before that. When I first came to work with John, we started moving around the country and then moving around the world. And as John pointed out, what we quickly found was that, a lot of people were touching pieces of flipped learning. Everyone had a perception of what flipped learning was. But in reality, none of us were seeing the big picture. All we were seeing were bits and pieces. So we would go some places, and many people thought flipped learning is all about the videos. It was Khan Academy. And if you were doing videos, you were flipping. There were other people who said, no. Videos produced by someone else, that's not flipped learning. In order to create that connection with people, you have to be producing the videos yourself. And they swore by the fact that only people who were producing videos themselves were actually doing flipped learning. And then there were people who thought flipped learning, blended learning, it's all the same. There's no difference between. We'd go to other places who would say that flipped learning, it's just a fad. It's here today, it'll be gone tomorrow. Don't worry about it. Don't think about it. It's coming and going. There were some people who said, look, flipped learning is simple. I said, no. You flip the videos, right? You come to school, to class, you do a few exercises. What more is there to know? And then there were other people who would say, flipped learning is extremely complicated. It's extremely difficult to do. And in fact, for that reason, I've stopped flipping because I tried it and it didn't work. And we saw that, but as John pointed out, we also noticed, as he acknowledged, that the best flipped learning that we were seeing, and I'm talking about great flipped learning, we saw great flipped learning in Argentina. We saw great flipped learning in Brazil. We saw great flipped learning in Korea, in China. We saw extraordinary flipped learning, of course, here in Turkey. But what we also saw is that most of that flipped learning was happening in isolation. They were in their boxes. They were in their silos. They were in their world. Oh, yes, many of them were part of communities of practice. They might have been talking with a peer, or if they were lucky to be in a flip department, they may have had 4 or 5 people that they could speak with. But for the most part, they weren't talking to people at another university or in another country or halfway around the world. That wasn't happening. And so you'd go into these countries, and the people who thought flipped learning was blended, that's what they were talking about. That was their view. We'd sit down and have dinner with people, very sharp, bright, competent, experienced flip practitioners. And they would argue with us that, look, there is no difference between flipped and blended learning. We were just in Australia a couple of months ago. I had a wonderful dinner with a very good colleague, and we argued for about an hour. He said, look, it's about the videos. If there's no video, it's not flipped. We said, that's not true. And then eventually we got to the point where we had to say to him, listen, I understand that that's your perspective. But let me share with you that people from 49 different countries, over 100 delegates got together, and they decided that this is what flipped learning is. So you now have a choice. You can either say, I don't care about what those 100 people from 49 countries think, or you can recognize that there's a collective wisdom, a collective insight, and that there's some benefit to plugging into that. John acknowledged some of this already as well. The other thing that we saw, we'd go to places, and again, we would find people struggling, education leaders struggling, educators, principals, professors struggling to solve problems that have already been solved in other places, but they didn't know about it. We also found, as John pointed out, that we survey the literature, the research that's coming out every month. And we found a fascinating thing, that it became very difficult to really figure out what any of this research meant, because at the end of the day, we didn't even know whether we were talking about the same thing. Are we comparing apples to apples, or apples to oranges, or oranges to pears? Who knows? They called it flipped learning, but was it the same thing? We didn't know. We also found that in training, it became another challenge. These silos, this working in isolation, became a big problem, because then flipped learning, if you're being trained by someone about flipped learning, what are you really getting? Well, depends. You're getting whatever it happens to be, the perspective and the belief and the value system about flipped learning from that particular trainer. There was no peer review. It was, if this person thought that it's all about videos, that person was going to teach you that it's all about videos. If the person thought that it was all about blended learning, they're going to teach you that it was all about blended learning. So that was another problem, no consistency. But here's the good news. There's an awakening happening, a massive awakening. And people all around the world are starting to realize that in order to be more effective with flipped learning, in order to make less mistakes when implementing flipped learning, and in order to have maximum impact, it is critical that we begin to get out of those silos, to stop working in isolation, and to begin to tap into the collective experience, insights, wisdom, strategies of the global flipped learning community, the brilliance. There are people who've done enormously incredible work with flipped learning all around the world. It's important that we plug into them so that we can take advantage of their collective insights. That's why, as John pointed out, the Academy of Active Learning Arts and Sciences was started. That's why those 100 delegates got together to work on that problem. And that's why, as he pointed out, we now have, for the first time in the over 10-year history of flipped learning, a clear picture of what effective flipped learning looks like and a roadmap, a very clear and specific roadmap on how to get there. When we first saw this, it became clear to me that this was significant for a couple of reasons. The first was this. For 2 years now, we had been working with some of the best flipped learning practitioners in the world. And when this project was done, he showed you them. He showed some more of them. When this project was done, the thing that was most astounding to me is that these people who were experts looked at the data and said, you know what? There are practices here that I've never heard of. There were practices here that I didn't know exist. When I heard them say that, it was clear to me that that group had created something that was fresh, that was new, that was significant, that was important, that could profoundly change the future trajectory of flipped learning. But there's another reason. Because the 21st century, it turns out, isn't quite what we all expected. Right? We thought that all that would be needed was to put all of the knowledge and insight and information in the world on the internet. Put a computer or a laptop or a phone or some digital device in every pocket and teach us all how to think critically. And if we did that, we'd be able to solve all of the problems in the world. But it turns out that it's a lot more complicated than that. And every day what we're seeing are bright people, intelligent people, well-educated people, people with PhD, ED, and Ds I've never heard of after the back of their names, who are dividing and fighting with each other, trying to solve problems, homelessness, inequality, income inequality, immigration, gun control, opioid addiction, climate change, go down the list. Smart people working on it can't solve the problems. Why? Because we become emotional, because we can't agree, because we can't collaborate. So we've now reached a point in our society where the ability to do this is more important than ever before. And there's data behind this. It's not just something random happening, there's data. Boston Consulting Group did a fascinating study of 100 entities in the US and Europe, and they concluded after analyzing the structures within these entities that the procedures, policies, approvals, red tape, bureaucracy, that all of the systems within these organizations had increased by 50 to 350%. Why? In response to the external complexity in the world. It's complicated. Let's make it simple. What are they basically saying? The world has become more complicated and we don't know what to do about it. And that explains why so many of us are feeling overwhelmed. We're working harder, not necessarily getting more done. It explains a lot. But what the research and the data and the literature and our own experience points out is that we've reached the point now where the days of working in isolation, they're over. They're gone. There is no way that any of us, I don't care how bright anyone is, how well educated anyone is, none of us can afford to work in isolation and think that we're going to be able to solve the biggest problems that we all face. Certainly, we're not going to be able to teach the next generation to do that. And we're seeing it everywhere. Before coming here, I was in Spain and Vienna. My phone in the US worked. My phone is with Verizon, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the world. But when I got to Spain and Vienna, I was using a different company. Why? Because they collaborated with companies in Vienna and Spain to give me service. I'm sure they were big enough that they could have created it on their own, but they didn't. They saw the value and the wisdom of collaborating. I came here on Turkish Airlines. I'm a United member. United is my standard airline. But I was able to fly and get the benefits of Turkish Airlines because United and Iberia and Turkish Airlines and some others created the Global Alliance. Because the business people realize that they can't do it alone, no matter how large they are. And look, if you read the paper, Microsoft, Google, Apple, no matter how big they are, they're all collaborating. And it's the same in education. Last year, for the first time, PISA, in addition to rating reading and math and science, they rated how well countries and school systems are teaching their kids collaborative problem solving for the first time. Now, those of you who've been following PISA, you know that since PISA has been introduced, it has shaken up education in every country. They call it PISA shock. If their numbers drop below a certain point, everyone gets rattled because it matters. Well, now, the ability to collaborate is going to be as important. Erasmus, here in Europe, you guys are way ahead of the world. Through Erasmus projects, we're seeing educators doing amazing work with innovation and flipped learning, getting together with countries, with people from other countries and doing amazing work. So what? What does all that mean? Who cares? Here's why. The work that has been done by those 100+ delegates in 49 countries, it tells us what's possible. It's an example of what we can do if we all connect and begin to work together and put our heads together and our intelligence together and our degrees together and our insights together. That element table shows us what's possible. The information about complexity and what's going on in the world and all of the issues that we are struggling and fighting to figure out how we're going to solve, and the divisiveness that is taking over countries all around the world. This shows us what's necessary, that we have to become better collaborators. We have to teach the next generation to become better collaborators, or we won't do well. And then finally, when you look at all of the increasing Erasmus collaborations going on all around the world, when you look at PISA and what's going on in the world, it shows us what's coming next. It's coming. Whether we're ready to collaborate or not, that's where the education community is going. Flipped learning is the way to get there, and that tells us what's coming. The good news is, and of course everyone here in this room, we know that you are among the best and the brightest in flipped learning. I'm going to get to that in a second, but let me make this point. We still have a lot of work to do. And the good news is that these are the organizations, universities, and schools all around the world who have already adopted these global standards. They're in the UK, they're in Spain, they're in Turkey, they're in Taiwan, they're in Portugal, New Zealand, Australia. So we've got a head start. We're moving in the right direction, but now it's up to you. It's up to you. Because here's the thing. I still don't understand. If flipped learning is so great, why isn't everyone doing it? I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense. You know it's great. You were involved, many of you were involved in flipped learning before it was popular, before it was ever proven. You were the lone rangers out there doing it. And now that much of the education community has moved on and is now doing the next new hot thing, you're here because you still believe in it. You're still looking to expand your skill sets, your knowledge, and learn. So it's up to you now. The group, they've done their part. Now we turn it over to you to do your part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Errol. I'd now like to share a message with you from Robin Brinks-Lockwood from Stanford University. And Robin's going to be talking about a higher education take on the global standards.
My name is Robin Brinks-Lockwood, and I served as a co-chair of the Global Standards. My name is Robin Brinks-Lockwood, and I served as a co-chair of the Global Standards Community for the Academy of Active Learning. My name is Robin Brinks-Lockwood, and I served as a co-chair of the Global Standards Community for the Academy of Active Learning Arts and Sciences. I teach for the Language Center as part of the Division of Literature, Cultures, and Languages, and I direct a summer program. I teach for the Language Center as part of the Division of Literature, Cultures, and Languages, and I direct a summer graduate and undergraduate levels. With two English speakers of other languages. The first, both at the graduate and undergraduate levels. The second is less overarching goals. The second is to prepare students for success at the university. The second is frankly, The second is to prepare students for success at the university. And frankly, I need to prepare them for success beyond academia. Prepare them by equipping them with the content and skills and tools they'll need to succeed at whatever professional and career goals they have set for themselves. I began flipping my classes when I realized the implications flipped learning was going to have on second language learners from around the world who wanted to study at the university level. Yes, I still had to teach English, but I also had to teach students how to do more than just memorize whatever content I was teaching. Like most university professors, I wanted students to actually be able to apply and use the content I was teaching. To do this effectively, I decided the best way to prepare students was to flip my own classroom. So here I was, teaching at a university and committed to flipping my own classroom. Years ago, I had no idea exactly what this meant. I began researching and interviewing both professors and students. I wanted the professors to tell me about the content they were teaching and how they were teaching it. I wanted students to tell me what they needed in order to both survive and thrive. I admit I made some mistakes along the way, but I also discovered some myths about flipped learning, things I thought I couldn't do, or other things I needed to do in order to create a flipped learning environment for my students. When I began flipping, there wasn't a go-to list of what I should or should not be doing, what were mere myths versus what were true guidelines. Thanks to John Bergman, the Flipped Learning Global Initiative, and the Academy of Active Learning Arts and Sciences, guidelines now exist. How I wish these had existed when I began my foray into flipped learning. The Higher Education Standards Supplement to the General Standards offers specific guidance to instructors at the university level who want to implement flipped learning. These additional elements of effective flipped learning include research-based instructional principles that help professors avoid the pitfalls and simply enjoy the benefits of flipped learning. These elements of effective flipped learning first help university instructors to understand the principles necessary to designing a course and lessons. You may ask why this is important. One thing I've learned is that many college professors weren't necessarily trained to be teachers. They were trained, and rightly so, to impart their expertise in the field, to be subject matter experts. As I interviewed students when I was developing my books on flipped learning, they told me one thing over and over again. Their professors were incredibly intelligent, but my students were struggling in class because they didn't understand the long lectures that were 50, 60, or 75 minutes long. It's a challenge for college professors who want to flip their classrooms. They are accustomed to simply imparting the knowledge, and students are left to comprehend it on their own, and even extend to apply, analyze, or evaluate material on their own. But the elements of effective flipped learning can help professors see what type of information should be inside the classroom and what type should be outside the classroom, thus helping students move beyond simply knowledge and comprehension of content and making college classrooms far more valuable than they already are. Another issue came to light when I was interviewing students. They didn't understand why they were learning the concepts. What good was this? What was the big idea? Why would they ever need this information? How was this going to help them to be an engineer, a scientist, a doctor, a teacher, a historian, a sociologist, or whatever other job they wanted to pursue? Following the elements of effective flipped learning will help college professors communicate to students not only what they are teaching, but why they are teaching that particular content. Students need to see that the content they are learning is transferable to other settings. We don't want our students to simply memorize what we tell them and then forget about it after a test. For them to be successful, we want them to actually apply what we've taught them. We want them to see the content and the application of that content and how it's going to be useful to them long after they leave an academic classroom. How our content can be useful to them after they earn an A on the test. Another challenge college professors face is lesson planning. When I moved to teaching at the university level, I realized that lesson plans are far different than they are for an elementary or secondary setting. As the daughter of an elementary school teacher, my mother, and a secondary science teacher, my father, I didn't realize the vast differences in planning a college-level course or lesson. The elements of effective flipped learning also include a section specific to lesson planning. The guidelines will help instructors understand the benefits of flipped learning and how to explain flipped learning in their syllabuses, a necessary first step for flipping in higher education. The implications of this are enormous. Students respond well when they understand the objectives and the reasons for learning what they are being taught. Yet another challenge is large classes. I am fortunate to be in a foreign language classroom that limits class sizes, but many professors don't have that luxury. If professors teach a 101 course or an entry-level class, they could have hundreds of students in a room at one time. To address this challenge, the elements of effective flipped learning not only provide techniques for flipped learning, but also include ways to adapt those for large class settings, including information on developing at least one student project throughout the term. No class is too big nor too small for a flipped learning environment. In summary, higher education instructors face some challenges, but the general elements of effective flipped learning combined with the higher education supplement take the guesswork out of flipped learning.
I'm always happy to talk about my journey from a traditional setting to a flipped environment or offer my input on the elements of effective flipped learning. Feel free to reach out to me via FLGI or email me at rbrinks@stanford.edu. Thank you.
So that was a message from Robin Brinks-Lockford at Stanford University, again talking about how flipped learning
My name is Robin Brinks-Lockwood, and I served as a co-chair of the Global Standards Community.
Transferability across and get the students to see why they're learning what they are and how they can use it in the future. Now, next up we have a message from Dr. Eric Mazur of Harvard University, and he's going to talk about the need for a new university model.
Good morning. I'm Eric Mazur, professor at Harvard University and co-chair of the Academy of Active Learning Arts and Sciences. I'm so glad many of you are attending the summit, and I wish I could have been there with you in Istanbul. I want to take a few minutes to impress on you the need for a new model of teaching. You see, when I started teaching at Harvard University back in 1984, I taught the way I had been taught by my teachers. I think we all tend to do that. We tend to project our own experiences onto the world around us. This here is a picture of me teaching my introductory physics class to pre-medical students at Harvard University's back a long time ago when I started teaching. In fact, you can see that this is an old picture. It's grainy. It was taken BC, before computers. Now, I want you to compare this picture to this illustration from an illuminated manuscript of the 14th century. This illustration shows a guest lecture given by King Henry VIII of Germany at the University of Bologna. And you only have to glance at the picture to see the uncanny similarities between the picture I showed you before of me teaching and this illustration. The students in the front row are paying close attention to the speaker. Some in the second row are taking notes. There's one who looks kind of bored. And as you move more towards the back of the classroom, you can see people who are paying less and less attention to the speaker. They're talking to each other. And then there's this person here in the back row who has clearly fallen asleep. Now, going back to the 20th century, it's clear not much has changed in the almost 1,000 years since the universities were founded. After teaching like that for a few years, I discovered that the results that I obtained were relatively poor. Yes, the students were able to pass my exams, and yes, they liked me as a teacher. Yet, testing showed that they were not really internalizing the important result. So back in 1991, I flipped my classroom, and I haven't looked back ever since. Initially, I did this in an auditorium, but then I decided to completely redesign my learning space. Students are now sitting in small groups around tables. At times, the classroom looks utterly chaotic, and that's exactly the way I want it to be. The learning gains have been impressive. Not only have the students learned new skills that are normally not taught, they're actually having fun working together. They enjoy the learning. I hope you'll have a chance one day to visit my classroom. And I promise you one thing. You'll come away thinking, Eric Mazur teaches kindergarten. And that's exactly the way I want it to be.
Thank you very much to Dr. Eric Mazur there with a fantastic analogy of how we want that chaos, that kindergarten style in our classrooms. I'd now like to invite to the stage Dr. Mohammed Shahin, MEF University Rector, and Dr. Shahin is going to talk about how MEF created a new university model.
Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to invite you to MEF University. I would like to welcome you, sorry. MEF University and Istanbul on behalf of my students and my faculty members. I'm the founding rector of the university. We have a very simple and easy to memorize vision to educate innovative and entrepreneurial global leaders to shape the future or to change the world, as John said. Let me give you some background about the establishment of the university. So the founder of the university is Ibrahim Arikan, as many of you know him very well. The university officially was established in 2012. I was appointed as the founding rector in March 2013. So we had our first students in September 2014. Right now we have over 3,000 students in undergraduate level, about 200 academic staff. We have three new approaches in higher education. The first one is, of course, flipped learning. And the second, 3+2, 3 years at MEF and 2 years in a partner university abroad. MEF gives a bachelor degree and the partner university gives the master degree. And 3+1, undergraduate education in Turkey takes 4 years, as you know. And we have a 4-year program that combines undergraduate and graduate degrees. Take the decision to flip the university, to establish a flipped university. The founder, Ibrahim Arikan, asked me first to organize a workshop with the professors. But when I first started, I didn't have any professors around me. I was alone with my secretary, my driver, only 3 of us. Later on, of course, we had some more people. I invited professors from other universities in Istanbul, especially those who had PhDs from abroad, so that I thought they might have international vision. So we had this workshop in May 2013. In the end of the day, almost 90% of the professors rejected flipped learning education system. But of course, I didn't give up on board of trustees. I asked them to give me another chance. Then I organized a similar workshop with only students who are already in the universities in Istanbul, just 1 week after, 6 days after the first workshop. And in the end of the day, yeah, more than 90% of the students said, yes, this is it. This is what we want. Then, just there, the president and the board of trustees decided to establish this university as a flipped university. These are the first actions we took. Design of the campus and classrooms, academic search on, Chronicle of Higher Education. From the academic search, I received 200 applications from all around the world. In that time, Anya, is she here? Anya Rantanen? No. She was with me, so we were together. We tried interviewing people online, and I asked them 3 questions. Have you heard of MEF University? They said no. Have you heard of Mohammed Shahin? They said no. Have you heard of Ibrahim Arikan? They say no. So why did you apply then? They said, you know, without any hesitation, it's because of the flipped learning. And the, of course, 3+2 international programs. So you are very international, well, innovative university. Anyway, then we established International Office, School of Foreign Languages, Center for Research and Best Practices in Learning and Teaching. Caroline Fed is the director of this center since the beginning. Education and Technology Department, Digital Library, and in-house recording studio. Now we have some evidences of successes since the beginning of the establishment. This is student mean GPAs. This is in our second year, in the end of second year. Student GPAs you know, in Turkey, 2 million students almost every year take a centrally organized exam. So depending on their grades, they choose universities, departments, etc. And depending on their grades from the foundation universities, they get scholarship. So when you look at the first column, for instance, if you are in the first 1%, you get full scholarship. You don't pay any tuition fee. So if you are in first 7%, you have only 25% scholarship. So, you know, we usually expect to see lower ranked students with much lower GPAs than higher ranked students. However, this is not happening at MEF. As you can see from the table, so the difference between the GPA, you see, is the lower one is 2.3 and the highest one is 2.7. So they are quite close to each other. We conduct every year almost several surveys on students when they first come in. You know, we ask several questions. This is one question. Why did you choose MEF University? The top 3 reasons: quality of the academic staff, flipped learning, 3+2, and innovative programs. In the same year, we conducted another survey in the second term of the academic year. 75% of the students, they said, yes, we benefit from watching the videos before the class. Almost 90% of the students, they said, yes, we are satisfied with the flipped learning methods. And again, 90% of the students said, yes, they would like to recommend flipped learning to their friends elsewhere. In 2017, we conducted another survey on the students. 78% of the students said, since the beginning of the establishment, flipped learning has continued to develop. And almost 75%, they said assessments, assignments, and projects have become more innovative since the beginning. And 76.5%, they said, we are okay, we are satisfied, so we don't want any improvement. So with the standard flipped learning at MEF. We had some new developments as well as flipped learning. In 2016-2017 academic year, in the beginning of the academic year, we had several meetings with the faculty members. to discuss to remove the final exams. And we took this decision. We recommended, we didn't remove completely, but we recommended that faculty members replace final exams, if they want, with semester-long projects on each course. So some of our faculty members have already done this. I read a few articles on that, discussion on international discussion on removing the final exams. I saw that in Harvard University, they only have final exams for 22% of the courses in undergraduate level. But as I said, if you are removing the final exams, you must have a term project, as well as other homeworks, etc. you might have. In 17 and 18 last year, in the second term of last year, we signed an agreement with two publishers. They opened their platform to us to adapt, e-platform, to use e-platforms with adaptive learning capabilities. So last year, 700 students took this platform, followed the courses from the platform, and this year it is over 2,200 students. Global developments, as you have seen, John established FLGI in 2016. We have been, as you can see, we have been working with them very closely. Maybe Caroline worked more than me for John. Almost every evening, Caroline says, tonight I'm online with John and other people. We published our first book in November 2016. Well, actually, this is the first book in higher education that explains the flipped learning methodology and etc. in a university level. University of Northern Colorado initiated a project on flipped learning funded by their university board. So they asked us to conduct a survey on our students. And we did it in 2017. So because they wanted to convince their board of trustees to apply to adopt the flipped learning. We are now writing a joint paper with them from the survey. This is an European project, Erasmus Plus program funded project. Just before the applications, a couple of weeks before they made the applications, we got this invitation from these people. The people, Finland is the leading institution, country, and the university is the leading institution of the project. This invitation came to us just because of our international presentations in the world. They said, would you like to join us to carry out this project? Then we joined and we made the application together and we got the project. And I think last month we had a workshop, a project workshop here at MEF. This is the project will, in the end of it's a 3-year project, will establish an e-learning platform for industrial innovation for especially the countries of Russia and China, primarily for Russia and China, and other countries who are in the projects. We signed a memorandum of understanding with JIS Engineering College in India. They've been using fully flipped, they become fully flipped institution last year. This year they invited us, myself and Caroline, to make a graduation speech. And Caroline also conducted a workshop with their all faculty members from 14 campuses. They have 40,000 students in 14 different campuses. These are only the conferences. I've been, myself and Caroline only, two of us, invited. We were invited speakers in those conferences. Also, our faculty members, other faculty members and instructors from the prep made several presentations in national and international conferences. So now for next year, okay, I can give you some information about this. Blackboard Teaching Learning Conference that took place in 2015. AC, American Council on Education. I made the presentation there. University of Northern Colorado, Caroline and some of our instructors went there. OEB, Caroline first went to Berlin and I went to Iceland. Leeds University, Tianjin University in China, Caroline went there. Future EdTech London, I made the presentation there. India, etc. Now we are establishing a first science park on artificial intelligence in Istanbul. So those, this is a business man initiative. So I asked them, why did you come to MEF to establish this kind of science park? There are plenty of universities in Istanbul, very well-established universities. They say just because of the innovative approaches you are using at MEF, and of course, very dynamic governing board, including me. Okay. This is our second book. We are planning to publish in the beginning of next year. FLGI will publish the book. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the new university model. Well, I would like to change slightly the subtitle. Okay. Did you discuss this? No. Not yet. Okay. Flipped learning, active learning, and digital learning, etc. We can combine. So because we have been using these three, very actively. So FLGI publishing a magazine, initiated publishing this magazine in April this year. So Eric Mazur is one of the flipped learning developers in the world. So therefore, he's on the first cover page, and myself is on the second, and Caroline. So FLGI, after all of our efforts this year and other years, FLGI made us Star of the Year. Thank you, FLGI. Okay, this is it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shahin, for telling the story of how MEF University established as a flipped university, the stages we went through, and where we're going in the future. I'd like to invite back to the stage now John Bergman, to talk about, to give a K-12 look at the global standards. To you, John.
Thanks. I think it's just really great how MEF started, right? They went to the students and asked them what they wanted. And they said they wanted flipped learning. I remember talking to one of my own students, a K-12 student, and he said, finally, somebody's teaching me the way I learn. Let's face it, we are teaching the YouTube generation, whether we like it or not. So instead of trying to fight that, we want to infiltrate that. In one of my books that I wrote, I surveyed 2,000-odd flipped students, and I asked them this question. In a flipped class, does the videos, the flipped videos, do they replace your screen time or add to it? Because let's be honest, students are going to be in front of screens today. 80% of them said, replace or add just a little. So what we're doing is instead of students playing Fortnite, they're watching a video on engineering or math or science or history or social studies or whatever it might be. So what's the take on K-12 education? How do these standards, and why do they matter in K-12 education? Well, like higher education, K-12 education, I'm going to say, is broken. In a 2014 study by Robert Marzano, he studied 2 million U.S. classrooms. It's very difficult to argue with a study with an N of 2 million, right? And he asked a very simple question. What instructional strategies are U.S. K-12 students learning through? And I had a chance to share the stage with him at a conference in Washington, D.C., and this is the data he shared. He shared that 58% of class time in the U.S. is spent interacting with new content. And as he stood on the stage, he said, that means lecture. Now, let's think a moment here. That's K-12. That includes the little guys, the little 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. And of course, you probably can imagine, what do you think happens when he segments the data? The older and older the student gets. The 58, the blue number, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And the red number, 36, is practicing and deepening the content. And he said basically that means them practicing stuff. Think of a math teacher and they're practicing math problems, which isn't bad. But do you notice the problem? The 6. The 6. Cognitively complex. This is like the deeper thinking. Isn't this backwards? Don't we want our students to think more deeply? Our K-12 students, certainly our higher ed students as well. So K-12 is broken. And here's why. Because in many ways what I think we've done is we've focused on the wrong thing when we're trying to reform education. Virtually every country in the world is trying to reform their educational system, but they've focused on the wrong thing. They've focused on curriculum, what we teach. Right? Most curriculum has to deal with having a very prescribed what we teach. On the other side, if you think of a continuum where we allow students to explore, a much more student-centered approach. But most of education is on the left side here, in a prescribed education. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't change our curriculum. I do believe that what we're doing in education and what we're teaching isn't completely correct. But changing the curriculum hasn't changed education. The second bucket, if you will, I think we've tried to change, is we're trying to change assessment, which is how do we know what they've learned? And on one side, we've got specific content. So there's this tied to the curriculum. They've got to learn this, and we're going to test them on this. But on the other side is a more student-centered approach, where it's an authentic test. They have to do a project. This is what you just talked about, Dr. Sahin, where you said you are now doing away with final exams, a more project-based centered. But the real problem that we haven't dealt with in K-12 education is how we teach, which was illustrated by those images that I shared with you at the beginning of the hour, right? We haven't dealt with that question of how we teach. Because what we're doing is we're teaching passively instead of actively. And that's true in K-12 education. We need to move from passive to active. But we know in flipped learning, something we've discovered is that flipped learning is different than other strategies because it's a meta strategy that supports all other strategies. We've discovered this. You might think of it this way. Think of all these different learning styles or learning methodologies as a circle. Project-based learning, learning by doing, personalized learning, flipped learning, inquiry learning, cooperative learning. But flipped learning is different. When I say it's a meta strategy, I mean it should look more like this, where flipped learning leads to and allows project-based learning to happen, where flipped learning allows for mastery learning and inquiry learning and all these other types of learning. Again, Dr. Sahin, you said this just a bit ago, right? You're now able to do more projects. Why? Because you're flipping your class. FLGI recently published a book on flipped learning in project-based learning. It was all about project-based learning. And the author said so much, he says, I could never have done PBL had I not done flipped learning. It gave me the time to do it. To use a metaphor by one of the research fellows at the Flipped Learning Global Initiative, Dr. Robert Talbert said this. He said, think of flipped learning as the operating system. So I've got a phone here. It's iOS. My laptop is Windows. The operating system. You don't really think a whole lot about your operating system. What do I use on here? I use apps. So think of flipped learning as the operating system and project-based learning, mastery, cooperative, all the other things as apps that you use. That's why flipped learning, one of the reasons why flipped learning is so powerful. It is the operating system of the new educational system of the world. That's what we need to do. So let's talk about the specific standards related to K-12. So why does this matter in K-12? So as we look at it, let's first of all look at, let's first look about the definition. So these are some of the standards I want to highlight that are specifically related to flipped learning. Now, one thing about the definition, one of the results of the standards project, which we haven't really talked about yet, is that the team came up with a new definition of flipped learning. The new definition of flipped learning is supposed to be the next slide. We'll come to it. I'll come to that. All right. Did I switch? Where did it go? There was a black definition. Oh, well, I'll just say I know what the definition is. The definition of flipped learning, all right, let me see if I can get this almost quite verbatim. Flipped learning is an educational approach, okay, and a framework that allows educators, now get this, to reach every student. If you look at the previous definitions of flipped learning, what you'll see, it talks a lot about how to flip, but not why we flip. It's to reach every student. And the flipped approach inverts the traditional model, this is the part you probably know, by introducing the course content before class so that students can then use class time for active learning. These are the apps that we just talked about. So the definition is important to really understand what the definition of flipped learning is. Now that leads us to the K-12 focus. Let's talk about there's some particular standards that are related to K-12. Now you might notice these have to do with parents, because often that's not a big issue at the university level. So how do you do parent support? Another one I think quite interesting is the last one. It talks about providing devices. This is particularly true of younger students, or if you're in a lower socioeconomic area where students don't have access to the technology. If you can provide devices, the students can do oftentimes what's called an in-class flip, where they don't have to do this stuff at home. They now do this in class, and they watch the short micro videos or do the short reading assignments during class time or even during the school time. There's a school in the States, and what they do is because they're very, very poor socioeconomically, and they're doing an in-class flip, but they're actually doing an in-school flip, because during the first or the last block of time, the students have time to work on the pre-class work outside of class, but in the school time. Does that make sense? And if we go down to another couple ones I think that are important, particularly in K-12, the next one has to do with the lower bloom. So this is in the individual space. You see, in the individual space, the pre-class work, the key thing is that you stay with the lower levels of Bloom's. You remember Bloom's taxonomy? Remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. What you should focus in on, best practices, we now know, is to do the lower levels of Bloom's. Conversely, if we move down to the group space, what do you do during class? The key to that is to do what? To do higher levels of Bloom's. Apply, analyze, evaluate, create. That's what you want to do in class. Let's dive down to the planning section. And this is something that's really critical, I found, is that if a teacher, when they're learning how to flip their class, doesn't have a simple planning workflow, they're just going to fall on their face and give up. So one of the critical elements of flip learning, particularly in the K-12 setting. And then the next one we're going to jump into, we're going to look at differentiation. Now this isn't as true at university, but in K-12 what we find is, of course, that students come with very, very different ability levels. They're going to come really low to really high. When I first started teaching at a middle school in Denver, Colorado, I had students in the 7th grade, so they were in the 7th grade, and some of them were reading at the 2nd grade level. And I had some who were reading at the 10th and 11th grade level. Oh, how I wish flip learning existed in 1986. I didn't know what to do with these huge discrepancies in abilities. Flip learning is an ideal method to differentiate for students. And then maybe one of the heart and souls of what you're going to do in the assessment phase is it's all about formative assessment, or what we like to call micro conversations. If teachers aren't walking around helping their students, having little formative assessments over and over and over and over again with their students, well, frankly, they're doing it wrong. All right? And then let's talk about maybe the most important one, and that is the R. If the point of flip learning is to reach every student, then we must build positive relationships with our students. And frankly, I'm saying here to talk about how it works in K-12. This is true. I don't care who you're teaching. If we want to reach every student, we've got to build positive relationships. I was in Xi'an, China, presenting at a conference there a number of years ago. And another one of our research fellows, Dr. Pa Hui Shan, who invited me there, he brought me to his office afterwards and he said, "John, I get it. Flip learning works. I'm convinced. But why? Why does it work?" He says, "I like cars. I like fast cars." He says, "When I see a fast car, I want to open up the hood. And I want to look in and see what they did to make it fast." Why is flip learning fast? Why is it working? And for 3 hours we talked about that. And we came up with 2 answers. Number one, which we've talked about a lot today, active learning. It provides for active learning. But let's not forget number 2, relationships. Students don't care what you know until they know that you care. This is one of the foundations of flip learning. And if a teacher is not building relationships with her students, she's not flipping her class. We are at a precipice today. I said earlier, we're going to change the world. But we're only going to change the world if each one of us who are sitting here, who are out there online, if each one of us chooses to go back with these 2 charges, active learning and reach every student. This is going to take courage. Maybe you're teaching at a university or a high school or an elementary school, and you will be the only one flipping your class. Maybe you're a principal at a school, and you'll say, "Oh, my teachers, they're so traditional, they'll never." They can. You know, we teachers, if we could be replaced by a YouTube video, we should be. It's time. I dream of a day when every student, and I mean every student, is in an active place of learning where they're being reached. In fact, I dream of a day when we don't have to call it flipped learning. We just call it learning. Isn't it time that we change how we teach, whether it's K-12, higher ed, corporate learning, graduate education, so that we can reach every student in every class every day? Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for giving us the K-12 picture of flipped learning. Okay, I'd like to move on now and talk a bit about how global standards enable international collaboration. So you found out a bit about me already. My name's Caroline Fell-Kurban. I'm the director of the Center for Research into Best Practices in Learning and Teaching at MEF University. I'm one of the co-chairs on the Academy of Active Learning Arts and Sciences. I was the inaugural research fellow on the FLGI. And I've been working with flipped learning since MEF University was established. And this means I've been working with people, collaborating with people in Turkey and also abroad. So it's given me lots of opportunity to find out what's working well and also what some of the challenges are. Now, I'm going to go over a little bit what John and Errol have talked about, but I'm going to start with a quick pop quiz. Who's this? Steve Jobs. So, two companies that he's really famous for. Apple and next, okay, 3, and Pixar. Okay, so I'd like to tell you a little bit, a story about Pixar. So Steve Jobs bought Pixar in 1986, and it was an extremely small computer manufacturing company at the time. Then in 2000, he decided to relocate the premises, and they found this huge, disused old factory. Now, the architects had already designed a plan, and the plan was like this. They were going to have one building for the computer engineers, one building for the animators, and one building for the executives. Now, instantly, Jobs could see there was going to be a problem with this, because you would have the silo effect. So he immediately said, no, absolutely no way. We need to have people working together, bumping into each other, collaborating, and being in a shared space. So he spoke to his architects, and his architects came up with this design. So there's this amazing meeting space in the center. But he knew it would take more than just having a space to get people to working together. You need to start moving things in. He moved all the mailboxes in. Then he moved the cafeterias in. Then he moved the coffee shops in. Then he moved the gift shops in. And it had the effect of people constantly bumping into each other. These are people from different organizational cultures. So you've got the animators, you've got the executives, you have, who have I missed? The computer engineers milling around in this same space, and it worked. Pixar is now the top-rated animation studio in the world. Now, Jobs made this happen because he got rid of fragmentation, and he put together collaboration. And this is exactly what ALAS Global Standards are also trying to do. We've had, as we've seen, the silos of instructors working alone, of institutions, of different countries in different languages with different cultures, all working in these separate silos. So the global standards, just like Steve Jobs' central area in the Pixar studios, is bringing this hub together where we can bump into each other and we can share ideas. There we go. I missed that one. But some of the challenges I've seen as I've been collaborating with people, the first one I call flip-twop, and Errol touched on this a bit, as well as John. There are still questions. Some people think flip learning is just about videos. Some people focus on the pre-work, but they don't focus on the group space. Some people will flip their instruction, but they won't flip their assessment. So there's still been this big question, flip what? And this is where the global standards are answering this question with a new definition of flipped. And again, we've seen trainers giving misinformation because it's their vision of flipped learning. We have seen research papers purporting to compare a flipped class with a traditional class, but what are they really comparing when you look at it? Some of them just had exactly the same classes with a few videos at the beginning. So I think that's been misunderstood. We're also seeing it in the media and reports. And this is a very recent report. This is Trends 2018, Learning and Teaching in the European Higher Education Area. Now, this report was focusing on student-centered learning in higher education in Europe. And some interesting results came out. They were looking at student-centered learning, and they included flipped learning in this. So they asked the question, which of the following approaches has your institution found useful for enhancing student learning? So we had teaching in small groups, problem-based learning, peer learning, community projects, and flipped classrooms. And you can see here that flipped classrooms rated at the bottom out of all the results. Well, when I saw this, to me, this raised the question, well, what are they talking about with flipped learning? What do they mean by flipped learning here? Because as far as we're concerned, teaching in small groups is part of flipped learning, and problem-based learning is part of flipped learning. Peer learning is part of flipped learning. At MEF, we have a whole load of community projects going on, especially with architecture, especially with education. So to us, these are all part of flipped learning. So what this made me realize, two things about this report. One is that there's still a misunderstanding of what flipped learning really is. And the authors do actually touch on this a bit at the beginning of the report. They said they found it very hard to classify what they meant by student learning. And when you read through and see what they're describing, they're pretty much describing flipped learning. So that's one thing that jumped out at me. The second thing is this is specifically based in Europe. Now, we've seen advances in flipped learning in the United States. We've seen it in China. We've seen it in Australia. So this, to me, highlighted that Europe is one of those silos that's still sitting there that we really need to connect into. And this is something that myself, ALAS, FLGI, John and Errol, we're going to be looking at. A second challenge that has come up that, again, Errol has touched upon is reinventing the wheel. Research has been done. It's out there. What was it? 95 papers came out in August of this year. And still, we have questions coming up. What is flipped learning? What does it mean? What should I do in the pre-class? What should I do in the individual space? What should I do in the group space? Which technologies should I use? How should I do my assessment? So again, that is making us realize we need to share this more. The information's there. We need to share. And this is where the global standards come in. And at this point, I'd like to share 3 examples of collaboration that MEF has been involved in, where the global standards are really helping us to have that central framework, so we've all got the same perspective. We're all hanging our ideas off the same framework. So this is, Mohammed earlier talked about JAS College of Engineering, and this is Dr. Malay Dave, and he's an incredible guy. Now, he's basically flipped over the last year JAS College of Engineering. They have multiple campuses around India. They have thousands and thousands of students. And we were invited to see their new recording studio. What had happened previously, they'd come to visit us over the past year. They'd done tours, they'd met instructors, they visited our recording studios, our classrooms, and then they took that model away and they started recreating that in India. So we were very honored to cut the ribbons for the recording studio. This was the graduation ceremony. I think, is it? So, Malai, hello. I think that's me, very excited at the front there, throwing my cap in the air. Mohammed was asked to give the speech. I was a guest of honor. The next day, I was invited to give a workshop to faculty from about 14 of the different campuses, and I was so honored. They dressed me up in a traditional West Bengal sari to do the workshop. So it's fantastic. We're still working together with them. We've been invited over in March to talk at a World Bank funded presentation. So, Malai, here we go, India's first flipped learning institute. Now, we're also seeing more and more visits from international PhD candidates. This is Rania. And if Rania is watching, thank you for the beautiful jewelry that I'm wearing today. Rania is a Syrian national. She's resident in Egypt, and she's doing her PhD in flipped learning. Now, she came and she spent a period of time at MEF University. Thank you very much, Joel, for hosting Rania. And she's really looking at how what we're doing at MEF University, also at the Flip Global Standards, she wants to take these ideas back to where she works in Cairo University, and she's going to look at flipping classes there. Now, I've got Rania up here, but Murat Turk. Hello, Murat, would you like to introduce yourself? You've also been connected with MEF. What have you been doing?
Hi, I'm Murat. I'm a Fulbright scholar at the University of Oklahoma, and I'm also a PhD student there. And one of my research interest areas is flipped learning, within the, especially within the English as a foreign language context.
Exactly. So welcome back again, Murat. It's great to see you here. And also, can I ask our group from Albania? Microphone. Okay. Could we have a... Now they know I'm going to call on them. Just down here, please. Joel, could you grab the mic? Okay, thank you. Would you introduce yourselves, please? And can you say why you were interested in coming to MEF today?
Okay. My name is Edita Nicola. And we come from the Lincoln Center of Albania. We teach English as a second language. Flipped learning is quite a new idea for Albania. So we were quite interested in getting more information and how to apply it.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you for having us.
You flew in yesterday to be here. Thank you very much. Now, I'd also like to talk about the CEPE projects that we're involved in. Again, Mohammed touched upon this a little bit. This is a big project. It involves 9 universities from Finland, Sweden, Netherlands, China, Russia, Turkey. I think we've got us all there. And we're building, not building a platform, we're using Open edX, but we're creating an online environment for master's level courses in innovations in industrial engineering. So most of the people involved, they're top level professors of engineering. We have visited KTH University in Stockholm. We've seen their remote labs, their wind tunnels. We visited 20 University in the Netherlands. They have the most amazing active learning center set up, which was actually designed by Erik Mazur, who went over there. We've been in Finland, Lappeenranta University of Technology, who are heading the project. And last month, we hosted everyone from the Erasmus project at MEF University. And here they're looking again at our recording studios, at our active learning environments, and looking for advice on flipped learning. And now we have these global standards that's really helping to support what we're doing. And I'd like to just finish here with a message from Professor Leonid Chichurin, who's the coordinator of the project, who wanted to share something about the standards. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Now, moving on, we have a message from Dr. Raul Santiago, and he's going to talk about looking beyond what we already know about flipped learning.
Hello, my name is Raul Santiago. I am a professor at the University of La Rioja in Spain and one of the ALAS co-chairs. It's a great pleasure to be here with all of you sharing knowledge, experience about the flipped learning model and about the standards. Well, after this short presentation, I am quickly going to look beyond what we already know about flipped learning. I will organize these findings into main three aspects. On one hand, IT infrastructure and digital literacy. Second, individual and group space, mastery, and finally, evidence and research. These three aspects will be supported by the global standard which had been identified. Here on the left, we can see the IT infrastructure, identify general standards, and now we can present recent research in which we can analyze the digital competence of more than 6,000 teachers, and with this information in our hands, we have asked 100 expert flip teachers to identify which are the most 12 important ones to flip our classes. Those are the results. So here we have, according to the European framework of digital literacy, having in mind these five areas: information and information literacy, communication and collaboration, digital content creation, security, and problem solving. We have asked to identify 2 of each in each area, plus 4 in the digital content creation, which we consider the most important one for flipping our classes. And those are the results. The data, the information that we have now says that most of teachers haven't got enough digital competence to flip our class. So we have a lot of work to do in the future. We have more information, more useful information for us. We have asked in some of the questionnaires that we are running all over the world about the technology used for flipping videos. And as you can see in this graphic, there are 2 main technologies, which are screencasting, which these wonderful tools we have on our hands, and also presentation to video. At the moment, we know that everything changes, and probably in the coming months this will be different. So we have these 2 tools for making videos, having also in mind that many teachers use different tools like interactive text or podcasting. So the average duration of flip videos is between 5 and 8 minutes, as you can see here also in this graphic. And the other option, 9 to 12, is also selected by most of teachers. Okay, let's go now in this quick presentation about probably the most important fact, which is how we use class time. That's why we have used the standards related to individual space mastery and also group-based mastery. We have this video in which we show how flipped learning is the perfect operating system to use active methodologies, active strategies in the class. Having this in mind, we see that regarding the aspects how much does flip homework affect the total screen time, most of students in this case says that adds a small amount of time to my screen time, which is good news, I think. If we go to active learning strategies used in the group space, we can choose 3 of them, the most chosen by teachers, which are problem-based learning, practice in the lab or in the classroom, and also cooperative learning. So those are the three most used in the class. Okay, and now let's go to the final slide, in which we are going to go in deep, trying to see what are teachers and versus students' perception about the efficacy of flipped learning. So let's have a look to this graphic, in which we can see which are the coincidences between both students and teachers about the flipped learning model. And you can see that there are three main things that are, coincidences. First one, student-student interactions are more frequent and positive. So we are improving interaction in the classroom. Second, that students have more chances to work with other students in the class, so we can improve cooperative learning, as an example. And finally, that learning is more active and experiential. So this is again good news. We can see that there are many other aspects that are improved, but these three are in which we can see more coincidences. To finish this presentation, I would like to show you this tag cloud, in which we ask our students to write their own words defining flipped learning. And it's funny to see that there are interesting words like videos, on pace, learn, working class, and they define very well from a student's perspective what flipped learning model is. So this has been my small contribution to this great summit. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'm here to try to solve or to give more information about any other thing I can help you.
Thank you to Dr. Raul Santiago. So looking beyond what we already know. Okay, now I have a message from Dr. Guozhen Huang, and he's going to talk about localizing the global standards for specific countries and cultures.
Hello, I'm Guozhen Huang from Taiwan. I'm currently a chair professor of National Taiwan University of Science and Technology. I'm also one of the AALAX co-chairs. It is very important to have global standard of free learning because it can facilitate researchers, teachers from different countries with different cultures to share their experience. Also, the standards can be a good guideline for research or teacher to conduct free learning activities. On the other hand, it is important for individual countries to localize the standards based on their needs or their local cultures or their particular educational policy. From the cultural aspect, in Taiwan, students generally do not get used to freely express themselves in a classroom as those in Western countries. Therefore, we encourage teachers to use instant response systems or other technology, such as clickers, to conduct competition activities or voting activity in the class. We found that with those mobile apps or computer technology, the students are more willing to present their opinions. From the aspect of educational policy, in Taiwan, when promoting new teaching modes, usually a top-down approach is adopted. For example, regarding the professional development dimension, in addition to the global standards items, we will guide the teacher and the school to follow the plan and criteria proposed by the Ministry of Education of Taiwan. Usually, a promotion program is conducted for guiding teachers to learn to use a new teaching mode. Another example of localizing the standards can be found in the IT infrastructure dimension. Planning simple workflow for video creation is usually conducted by teaching resource centers in a university or in a school. Similarly, the technology tools are usually chosen and provided by the teaching resource centers. To sum up, localizing those standards based on individual countries' needs, educational policy, or local cultures could be very helpful for those countries to promote free learning. Therefore, I would like to ask you to think about how to localize the free learning standards in your country. Just think about it. Goodbye.
So that was Guo Zhen talking about the importance of localizing these global flip standards to your local cultures where you are. I'd like to say thank you very much to all of you, to John, to Errol, to Mohammed, to Raoul, Robin, Eric, and Guo Zhen for their contributions today. And I'd like to open the stage up, or the audience up, for questions. John, if I could invite you back to the stage. Are there any questions at all that you would like to ask? We'll just get the microphone down.
While they're answering questions, I was just on the stream, and there were a lot of people, and they were interacting and having a conversation on the stream, and I was interacting with them. So thanks to Peter and Patricia and the people whose names I couldn't pronounce. You were saying some great things on the streaming part of the site. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you very much for this wonderful launch. I haven't seen in the element table something that explains the role of the instructor. Perhaps it was difficult to, we didn't have it in advance. So in any case, the question is, how does this orchestration, what kind of role, how does the role of the instructor change?
Yeah, one of the standards is, I think it's LF, and it stands for lecturer to facilitator. So the whole role of the teacher changes. I really believe that the role of the teacher, it's not me talking, this is the 100 people who are saying that the role of a teacher needs to change from the deliverer of content to the facilitator of knowledge. I mean, again, a lot of it, we have used Bloom's taxonomy. The value of a teacher isn't knowledge dissemination anymore. It's apply, analyze, evaluate, create. And that's clearly spelled out in the standards, yeah. But yeah, I think it's LF, thinking bottom right corner, if I recall. Yeah. Over here? Who's going to be our microphone?
Dinjo's got the mic.
I do have a strong voice.
No, but it needs to be picked up on the stream, so they won't hear you. So why don't you stay in the middle and then play Vanna White?
Thanks a lot.
Yes.
To all the presenters. My question is actually to you.
Okay.
You talked about K-12, and I'm a bit disappointed to see that Turkey hasn't really taken up on this idea in K-12 as much as I would have liked them to, after having listened to your talks. Are there any plans, future plans, to somehow spread the word, make this a more prominent idea in K-12? Is there any chance there is an association that we could join, be part of? I have a lot of experience in K-12 around the country, and I really feel that the things you talked about would make a huge difference in how things are done in K-12, where sadly there's a bigger group of courageous people who can take on ideas like this. Unlike in universities, I think they're more open to change. So I would really like to know, what are the plans for K-12? Are there any associations that we could join, be involved in to spread the word?
Well, at our organization, the Flip Learning Global Initiative, you can join. I mean, we've got a social platform that you can be a part of, and we could create a group for Turkish educators, Turkish K-12 educators, Turkish higher education instructors, whatever it might be. One of our hopes, one of the reasons we're here, not just because MEF is the first flipped university, one of our hopes, and I know a lot of you represent Turkish K-12 education, that it could start today, here. you should connect. Well, who is K-12 Turkish educators right now? Look around. You guys need to talk to each other because the revolution can start right now. You should all go to lunch together, right, or something. We should have a little conflab up there and exchange emails, and let's start it right now because there's 50 of you sitting right here. It'd be crazy not to take you here now, and let's start the fire here. Yes, sir.
As College of Education at MEF University,
Hold on.
we can organize the K-12 initiative.
It's a great idea.
As the College of Education at MEF University, we can lead the activities. If there is a desire to work on it, we can organize it.
Wonderful. The Dean of the College of Education here at MEF is speaking, right? So this is awesome.
That's really what this event is about as well, is getting people from Turkey here as well as internationally online, but to talk about these things. We have everybody's details here now. I'll pass them over to you, Mustafa Hocam, and then we can go from there and see what we can develop. Thank you very much.
So he's going to organize it. That's a great thought. Now we've got somebody in charge. The right person.
Any other questions?
In the back. All right.
Hi everyone, my name is Volkan. I'm teaching biology at high school. I'm struggling with three main things. One is the rushing after the catching the curriculum. This is the first thing while I'm doing the activities, and the second is the allocated time for these. This is also the problem, and then the pupils which are less motivated on learning. There are three main problems to maybe to follow up these kind of things. What is your approach on it?
Well, that's one of the reasons. Let's take it in reverse order. I mean, the big question that's almost always asked about flipped learning is what if the students don't do the pre-learning? And the reality is the standards address those issues. And I'll just give you sort of big picture right now. I like to think of it using a principle of marginal gains, meaning if you do one thing, you'll get more to watch, and then you do another thing, you get a few more and a few more. So there's probably 10 different things built into the standards that are the elements of effective practice that address this. So number one, it would be important to use an advanced organizer, all right, so that the students have something to follow along with. Number two, if the teacher makes their own contents, that's important because that gets more students to buy in. Number three, if you teach them how to interact with the contents before. And so there's a huge series of things that are in there that will help you to address that question. It really is not becoming a big issue. Most people think that's the big problem, and it is a problem, so let's say that. But it's not as big a problem as people make it out to be. I think the second question you asked is, how do I find the time to go through the change? And the answer is, I don't know. But I'll say this. What I've found is that when an institution buys into this model on a larger scale, there's ways to make this happen. So if you are a leader at your school, if you say, I want to bring flipped learning into my school, then you need to find a way to get the time for your teachers, for your instructors to make this happen. And that's where you'll see it take off. It's still taking off fine if you've got a teacher here and a teacher there, or two teachers here, or three teachers there, who are willing to put the extra time in. But if you really want to see real change, make this a priority of your institution. And I forget what the third question was. Something about curriculum. How do you keep up? Oh, so while you're, or just is that related to more the time of how do I just keep up with the students and preparing the contents?
Is it curriculum coverage where within a school you're told you have to get from here to here within a certain time?
Okay, so I think I understand the question is that in flipped learning you can get through more content because you're not spending up, your teachers are not spending time lecturing. So you're going to be able to cover more content, or my personal preference, you don't cover more content, you cover the content you already have in more depth. That's my preference, but I've seen both happen in different contexts around the world. So I think that was the question. So I answered that question. we've got some questions here, back here, and then you can be next. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Harun. I'm coming from the English School of Kyrenia from North Cyprus. I'm teaching maths, and I'm currently in class flipping. My question is, you always say spread the word, spread the word. Well, of course, this is not a question that you can answer in a minute, but I would like to, for the FLGI, go into more detail about spreading the word, because one of my colleagues have seen my blog, which I put my videos in, and he asked permission whether he could use my videos. I certainly say yes, but I'm just a colleague, so I don't have any, all I can do is encouraging my colleagues, and I'm really uncomfortable with that, because I really would like to spread the word. So maybe there are some strategies that you would come up and help us. Thank you.
Yeah. My first thought is I just came from the FlipCon Spain conference. I was sitting next to actually he wasn't a young teacher, a seasoned teacher, he's probably in his 40s, and he said, "John, I want to thank you." I said, "For what?" "Last year you challenged me because I was flipping at my school alone and nobody else was flipping, and I asked you the question that you just asked me." And he said, "What do I do?" I said, "You need to go back and flip your class the best that you can, so you make it an attractive way." He went and did that. He followed best practices, and he said, all of a sudden, one other teacher asked about it, and then another teacher, and then they went to the principal, and they said, "This is really working. We should," and it's now spread throughout their whole school in 1 year. So I don't know if that's really going to happen at your school, but that really is my best advice. I mean, I think ideally, if we're really going to do change, we've got to get buy-in from your principal, your headmaster, whatever. Because if they see this and they make it a priority, and then they see how this can work, the best change happens when it's bottom-up change, that's what you're doing, but also supported from the top. And that's where you get magic happening. If you've just got a few teachers trying, depending on your leadership, it may be very difficult. You are here. Yes, next.
I would like to thank for all the parties for organizing such a great event. I'm so glad to be here, to be a part of it. I just want to know more about your Flip Learning certification trainings. As much as I know, it is flipped, as the name suggests. We have online lecture, and what about the face-to-face interaction? I want to learn more about it. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is being sponsored by the ALAS, the Association of Active Learning Arts and Sciences, but then we have a second organization, which is the Flip Learning Global Initiative, and we have certification courses that are now aligned with the standards. There are, in English, there are 4 different certification programs that are completely done online. You can get credit at a European institution if you want university credit for those. We also have them in Spanish, if Spanish is your language of choice, and we also have them in Chinese. So those are some choices. If you go on the websites, you can find them. If you want face-to-face training, so our organization does do lots of face-to-face training. We have 30 international faculty members all over the world who can also do trainings. And oftentimes we've found the best way to train an institution up is that they do some of that pre-work, the certifications, which are completely online, follow that up with a face-to-face training, and that's where we see huge institutional change. So if you're interested, you can reach out to myself or Errol, who handles all of that side of the game. And then there was someone further up here. Yes, right here.
Actually, I'm not asking a question. I'm just as a teacher at a high school. I'm the department head of mathematics. So years ago, I tried a very simple app which is called EduCreation. So I just would like to answer some of the questions here. I tried to flip some of my classes because the curriculum is very intense and you need more time. So that's why I did it, actually. It helps. So it's not just me screencasting and doing some videos. It was just using some online platforms like Google Documents or something like this to assign something to my students. And actually, because I have limited time to teach, I have like 40 students. I solved some questions with educations. And my motto is, when you do something, if you do it online, it does exist. So out of 40 students, and just in a week, I saw that thousands of students watched the video. I was so impressed and surprised, actually. And then, actually, within the schools, K-12 schools, even if it's just you doing that, after that, you know, I am kind of good at this, and then your other colleague is good at that. So after a while, students learn how to find who is the best doing this and that. So they're just watching videos to learn. And as you said, instead of playing Fortnite or whatever, just wasting their lives, they do learn from the videos, from the you know, online platforms.
Yeah.
It's very good. Yeah.
I really believe, I mean, what you're saying is the changing role of an instructor, of a teacher, is going to change. Students are going to go ahead, if my own daughter's attending university, and she told me, Dad, I'm being ripped off by my university because I'm paying, in US dollars, $40,000 a year. That's what it costs at her university to attend. And my teacher stands up there and drones on and on. But they're streaming his and recording his lectures. This is one particular professor she's talking about. Dad, I just play him at 1.5 speed and I don't go to class anymore. It's a waste of my time. I'm not going. And because he talks so slow. And it's a waste of my time. And he's not a very good teacher anyways. And so sometimes, I mean, she emailed me and said, I need a physics professor who I can get some better information on, because my physics professor isn't very good. And I said, here's a website. There's a great physics professor who's done flipped work. And she didn't even go to class. So she's paying thousands of dollars to go to a physics class, and she's learning from my friend who's a great physics flip teacher. It's like, if they made that an active place of learning, it could be magic. But no. Yeah. I'm sure some of you are frustrated too. Over here, sir.
I think we should make this the last question.
Okay.
We're running a bit short of time.
I'm a physics teacher and also I'm a project coordinator. I will ask that, is there any application for small kids and primary or the other schools for your system?
Of course. I've written an entire book on the subject of flipping elementary classrooms. And the biggest thing I would say is that the littlest students, you don't do what you call a traditional flip, you do an in-class flip. This is what you're doing, right? Where the students are going to, in stations, get the contents, maybe on a small iPad or some kind of a tablet, and they do station work. Because asking a 5-year-old student to go home and navigate to a website and go to Blackboard or whatever, not going to happen. So that's what we see, kind of more of a station work model for our youngest students. But I do see that when they move to about the 4th grade, 10 years old or so, 9 years old, somewhere in there, those students often are fine and ready for an in-class flip, assuming that your school has the technological resources, or the students at home have the appropriate technological resources. So yes, it works at the youngest levels. There's research now on, little ones up to graduate education. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Now, thank you very much, John, for answering so many questions there. I'd like to invite Errol back up onto the stage now.
Ready. Question, how many MEF professors or instructors are in the room? Could you raise your hand for me, please? 1, 2, 3, good. Could I ask you all to come forward? Could I ask you come forward, come forward, come forward? MEF, if you teach here at MEF.
To the stage.
Yes, to the stage. To the stage, please come. Please come, please come. All on the stage, please come, yes. Please come. Had the wonderful opportunity to have dinner with the director last night, and he shared some stories that he didn't share with you earlier today. And one of them was about all of the sleep that he lost when they began this program here. And it was a fascinating story because he was given the option. And the option was either change the instructional model to something else, a different name, because apparently flipped learning doesn't have a direct correlation in Turkish, or to maintain flipped learning. And he said that he went home and that he lost sleep and he just didn't feel good about it. And he came back the next day and said, no, we're going to call it flipped learning. And if we don't call it flipped learning, I'm not doing this. And I thought as I listened to him, yeah, my kind of guy. Why? Because changing the world and making things happen require people just like this, and like all of the people here on this stage, the trailblazers. And that's why at the Academy of Active Learning Arts and Sciences, we created the International Flipped Learning Award. We now call it the Eric Mazur International Flipped Learning Award. And the reason for that is really simple. It takes so much courage and so much effort and so much willingness to take the hits and the beats when you go out there. And so we wanted to make sure that we recognize, we could have gone down to a local trophy shop maybe and picked up a piece of plastic or something like that. But this award is, we wanted something that would be comparable to the Oscar. Yes, and it just so happens that this is made out of the same material as an Oscar. And we wanted something that was going to be as impressive and as world class as an Emmy. This is 2 pounds heavier than the Emmy. Because we wanted to make sure that we could recognize world-class flipped instructors and professors and K-12 educators with the same level of quality as entertainers get. So it's my honor to recognize all of you and to present you with the Eric Mazur International Flipped Learning Award. You're welcome.
Okay. But can we have a picture with John and...
Yes, John and Errol, could we have you back on stage?
There
we go.
Yapıyor muyuz emin değilim ki.
Biraz ağır ha.
Wow. Don't drop it. Don't feel. Wow, that's heavy.
Aslında Bora Bey'in çok emeği var hocam biliyor musun? Lefte değil ama.
There we go. Let's move up a bit. Come on.
Biraz erkekler kadınlar var. Hocam haremlik selamlık yap. Ne bu böyle Türkiye? Pazar bir kadın.
Evet, bilmiyorum. Thank you so much, Joe.
Yes. Congratulations. All right. It's a pleasure. Shake your hands. Congratulations. 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 You're very welcome. You're very welcome. Congratulations.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Good. Very good.
Joe, will stay here.
Bir anons yapar mısın şeyi? Can you announce that K2
and the other one as well.
Okay. Yes, just one final announcement. Professor Özcan here, our Dean of Education, is saying all of the K-12 people who are interested, he's available now. You can start chatting and making those connections now. John, there were a few more questions. If we can hold on to you for a bit. If you have more questions for John, John's available here. After that, if you're visiting us, if you want to purchase lunch, you can go yourselves to Unique. There are lots of amazing restaurants there. If you want to join the tour, 3 o'clock in the girish, in the entrance hall, and then 4 o'clock we'll have a last meeting with John. So if you want to join us again, 3 o'clock. Okay, thank you very much.